Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for April 9th of 2024. Yes, it is the 1-year anniversary for Project Gladiator, and I thank everyone for their support so far. I do have a couple things on the way for the anniversary, mainly a time-lapse video for the storm chase on April 2nd, as well as a dedicated anniversary video, and then I think also a video that I will be going over and explaining the purpose of Project Gladiator for any newcomers. But those are probably going to be delayed, especially because of the severe weather for today and tomorrow especially. So definitely make sure you're on the lookout for those things if you are interested. However, as far as the weather for today, currently we have an enhanced risk from central and eastern Texas into Louisiana here, as well as a marginal threat for the coast of Lake Erie that I will likely not cover in today's forecast. Threats for today do include a 10% tornado risk with the hashed area, indicating that we could see the potential for a conditional tornado outbreak, as well as a couple of strong tornadoes in that region, and that's going to be the primary risk for today. Other threats include a 30% damaging wind risk with that hashed area, indicating that we could also see the potential for some destructive wind gusts, and then we also do have a 5% damaging wind gust risk for the marginal threat further up to the north there. And then for our hail risk, we do have a 30% with the hash area, indicating that we could see the potential for some gorilla hailstones, as well as a 5% for hail for that marginal threat further up to the north as well. For tomorrow, which I am pretty concerned about, we do have a moderate risk for southern Mississippi, eastern Louisiana, and southwestern Alabama there. Threats for tomorrow do include a 15% tornado risk, indicating that we could see the potential for a couple strong tornadoes. We could definitely see the potential for a significant tornado outbreak tomorrow, and depending on my schedule, I will most likely be going live for this. Threats for our damaging wind risk do include a 45% with the potential for some destructive wind gusts. That alone can also harbor a moderate risk. So we kind of have two risks that are leading to this moderate risk for tomorrow. And then for our hail risk, we do have a 15% hail risk, where we could see the potential for some scattered large hail. For our day 3 outlook, we do have two areas of a slight risk. We do have a slight risk for Ohio into eastern Kentucky, as well as a pretty large slight risk that extends from central and southern North Carolina, South Carolina, southern Georgia, and eastern Georgia, and northern Florida there. And the probabilities are just a 15% for those slight risk areas. And then for our day 4 to day 8 outlook, we do have a 15% for our day 7 outlook for the Central Plains, where we are watching for a setup for some significant severe thunderstorms being possible anywhere from the 15th to the 17th, but this is currently set on the 16th. Taking a look at our WPC outlook, starting off the excessive rainfall forecast. For today, we do have a moderate risk for southern Arkansas, western Mississippi, northern Louisiana, and eastern Texas, where we could see the potential for some widespread flash flooding, some of which could potentially be significant. The same thing goes for tomorrow, where we do have another moderate risk for flash flooding for southern Alabama into portions of Georgia and the Florida Panhandle, across central and southern Mississippi, and into northern and northeastern Louisiana there, where we could also see the potential for some widespread and potentially significant flash flooding. For our day 3 outlook, we do have a slight risk for flash flooding that does extend from southern New York across Pennsylvania, Maryland, eastern West Virginia, central West Virginia, and eastern North Carolina there, where we could see the potential for some scattered flash flooding. However, a very large majority of the eastern coast here could see the potential for at least some isolated flash flooding. We will see an insane amount of widespread rainfall for tomorrow, so flash flooding is definitely not out of the question. Sorry, not tomorrow for our day 3 outlook. And then for our winter weather outlooks for today, we aren't really watching anywhere where we could see the potential of heavy snowfall. We do have a couple areas, some pretty isolated areas in some of the elevated regions of the Rockies in Montana and Wyoming there, where we could see some isolated elevated heavy snowfall. For tomorrow, we are not expected to see any sort of heavy snowfall in the United States greater than 4 inches, but we could see some heavy snowfall up into Canada there. And then for day 3 outlook, we are again still not looking for any heavy snowfall. Taking a look at our weather models, starting off with our 500 millibars like we usually do, as well as our surface observations and how that's going to work in conjunction with our risk for severe thunderstorms. As of right now, this is an ongoing risk. We do have storms currently ongoing. They did develop much earlier in the day, however, only now have I been able to get the chance to record a video for it. We are currently watching a pretty powerful upper level low that is currently situated across the southwestern United States into northern Mexico there, that is advecting into the region of concern and is slowly moving eastward and becoming negatively tilted. This is still mainly a neutral tilt, and it may even go back to being positively tilted due to a little shortwave there. But we are going to see a pretty strong 500 millibar jet streak that is going to be rounding the base of this with 500 millibar flow that may be able to reach upwards of 80 to 70 miles per hour across this region. That will definitely provide us with quite a lot of lift, and that should definitely be able to support the risk for significant severe thunderstorms, as well as the potential for quite a lot of speed shear, and we could definitely see a pretty big hail risk out of this. And then as far as our surface observations, we do kind of have a mess of fronts here. However, we do have a pretty big warm sector and a mess of surface lows further to the west across western Texas, with a couple of warm fronts or stationary fronts that are draped into eastern Texas and Louisiana. As warm air advection pushes out of the south here, we could see storms fire either along the warm front or in warm air advection, but they're probably going to fire along either the stationary or warm fronts. And then we also do have a dry line that is somewhere off to the west here that may also be able to fire off some additional development. However, with the configuration of our upper level air pattern here, we will likely see a very messy setup for our storms. Taking a look at our 850 millibar jet and our low-level jet and how that's going to affect our directional shear and the risk for tornadoes across this region, we are expected to see a pretty modest low-level jet that's going to advect out of the south here, with 850 millibar flow that is expected to get upwards of 30 to 40 miles per hour and may be able to get upwards of 50 miles per hour in some isolated regions. That will provide us with some pretty decent shear, and spoiler alert, we are expected to see quite a lot of instability across this region, and with our modest low-level jet and the insane amount of instability, we could definitely see the potential for a couple of tornadoes across this region, and the potential for some of those to be strong as well. However, our low-level jet is a little bit more on the weaker side, but we will definitely see some pretty decent, not weak, but pretty decent directional shear come out of it. Taking a look at our 200 millibars and how that's going to affect our speed shear, as well as our defluence and our spreading of our isobars and wind vectors for our upper level lift. Starting off with our speed shear, we are expected to see a pretty strong 200 millibar jet out of the west here, advecting from this trough, with a 200 millibars flow that may be able to get upwards of 60 to potentially 100 miles per hour, knots across this region. That will definitely supply this region with quite a lot of bulk shear, quite a lot of speed shear. We could definitely see the potential for some massive hailstones across this region as a result. As for the spreading of our isobars and our wind vectors, we are expected to see a little bit of spreading. It is quite prominent here. And we will definitely see a void in the upper levels in the atmosphere as a result of that right in the region of concern, and that will definitely provide us with a lot of lift really enhanced and the potential for severe thunderstorms later this afternoon. Taking a look at our shear as a result of our upper level patterns, starting off with our directional shear and the risk for tornadoes across this region. Again, as mentioned previously, we are expected to see some pretty decent shear. We aren't expected to see really too strong shear with the storms that are going to be across this region. We do have a cluster of a really strong shear, which is going to move off into the northeast over the next couple of hours. However, out of the south, we are expected to see some pretty modest storm relative helicity values. They're probably going to be ranging anywhere from 200 to potentially 300 and 100. And spoiler alert, again, with our insane amount of instability, we could definitely see a pretty decent tornado risk. Our risk for a strong tornado is definitely going to be much more limited. However, we could definitely see the potential for strong tornadoes, especially with our instability. Taking a look at our speed shear and the potential for hail across this region, Again, we are expected to see a very large amount of speed shear across this region. It's not going to be anything too crazy, but we'll definitely be supportive of the potential for some gorilla hailstones across this area. We could see bulk shear values that are probably going to range anywhere from 50 knots to potentially 60 and 70 knots across this region, which will definitely be supportive of the potential for some pretty massive hailstones, especially with the very unstable environment that we have. Taking a look at our composite reflectivity, we're going to be going over the timing for our storms as well as some general radar analysis and what I noticed as far as our simulated radar. As of right now, we do have some storms that are currently ongoing, which is exhibiting mainly the potential of some pretty strong damaging wind gusts and some large hailstones. However, this is going to move off to the northeast over the next couple of hours, and we are expected to see additional development in the afternoon hours into the early night hours. We are expected to see the potential for some more supercellular and cluster development. It may be a little bit more messy, it may be more high precipitation, but we may be watching for the potential of some more supercellular development that may not be necessarily all that messy across the warm sector. And then we may also be able to see the beginning of our risk for severe thunderstorms in the form of a line of some more discrete cells along a cold front towards the region of concern around 1 a.m. However, our supercellular development is likely going to begin anywhere from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. and continue into the very early morning and move out around, I would say, around 9 to 10 a.m. Tomorrow. Taking a look at our dew points as well as the instability that we are expected to see across this region, how these various parameters are going to affect our instability, we are expected to see a very large amount of moisture across the warm sector with dew point values that are probably going to be ranging anywhere from the low 7s to approaching the mid 7s, but mainly staying anywhere from 70 degrees to potentially 73 degrees and maybe approaching 74 degrees. That is a insanely moist environment, and with the daytime heating that we usually get in the springtime in the southern central plains, which we will look at, we are definitely going to see the potential for a very large amount of instability across this region as a result. Taking a look at our temperatures, again, as I previously mentioned, the intense spring heating that we are going to see across the plains, as of right now across southern Texas, we are seeing temperatures that are already getting up into the low 90s today. And across the warm sector, we are going to see temperatures that are going to stay around 80 degrees into the upper 70s. And as the sun sets, as it becomes into the afternoon hours and it becomes much more darker, we are expected to cool down to probably around the low to mid 70s, which will still definitely be supportive of some pretty decent instability across this region. It may be overall a little bit more limited, and more convective inhibition will likely be in place, which will likely prevent any messy convection and any stray rain showers and more elevated storms from developing free in the warm sector, which will aid in our severe thunderstorm potential with any robust storms that develop. Taking a look at our lapse rates and how that's going to affect our hail risk as well as our instability, we are expected to see some pretty decent lapse rates across this region, with lapse rates that may be able to get upwards of 7 to potentially an isolated 8 in some regions, but mainly lingering around 7. Will definitely be able to support and aid in quite a lot of instability across this region, and that will definitely aid quite a lot in our hail risk, making it much colder in the atmosphere the higher up you go, which will wildly help our hail risk. So we could not only, again, see the potential for some massive hailstones, but also the potential for quite a lot of instability due to these lapse rates. Taking a look at our 700 millibar temperature and our convective inhibition, how that's going to affect our storms across this region. As of right now, we don't really see a cap in place across the warm sector. However, we do have warm air advection out of the south, which will lead to a elevated mixed layer across this region, which will likely, again, prevent any convection that are not going to be associated with any robust cells, any free rain showers, any messy elevated storms that will likely keep that all from forming. and will help with our storm risk overall. However, our elevated mix layer we will have to watch because it may lead to overall a more limited risk. However, as the sun sets and we see a increase in convective inhibition, our tornado risk is going to begin to decrease, likely around 9 p.m. Into the very early morning hours of tomorrow, as we see more convective inhibition being increased from the west. But that elevated mix layer will also continue to stay in place from the south. Taking a look at our most unstable cape, and then we'll take a look at our surface cape. We are expected to see a very large amount of instability starting off. Our first cell is expected to fire in a environment where we could see cape values that may range anywhere from the mid 2000s to the low 3000s, potentially reaching the mid and upper 3000s further off to the west along the dry line, and we may even see a couple 4000s along that dry line as well. We are definitely expected to see a very large amount of instability across this region as night comes in and the sun sets and it becomes darker and we lose that surface heating. We are still going to see some pretty decent instability across this region, with cape values that are probably going to be staying anywhere from the mid to upper 2000s, which will still be able to fuel the risk for a couple of tornadoes, some of which could be strong, the potential for some very large hailstones and gorilla hail, and the potential for some destructive wind gusts. Taking a look at our surface-based cape, I don't really have too much to say about this. However, the majority of our most unstable cape is expected to translate down to our surface-based cape, which does mean that our most unstable parcel will be able to support the potential for surface-based storms. Its storms will likely not be elevated because they can tap into that surface layer, and that will allow for rotation to develop at the surface and the potential for tornadoes. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability and how that's going to affect our risk for tornadoes across this region. Again, we are expected to see some pretty decent instability, especially at the surface with our 0 to 3 kilometer cape. We could see a 0 to 3 kilometer cape values that are probably going to range anywhere from the mid to low 2000 or mid to low 100s in potentially approaching the upper 100s and the low 200s further off to the west. It's not terribly strong, but it is pretty modest and will definitely be a pretty big aiding factor in fueling these severe thunderstorms later this afternoon. Taking a look at our energy helicity index values and how that's going to affect our tornado risk, we are expected to see some pretty decent energy helicity index values across this region, with energy helicity index values that may be able to get upwards of the 4 to potentially 3, and they're going to maintain that 2 to 3 region. It may decrease a little bit into the afternoon hours as the sun sets and we lose our instability a little bit, but we still have some pretty decent instability. Again, we still have some pretty strong energy helicity index values, and they will definitely be able to support the potential for a couple of tornadoes and potentially some significant tornadoes as well, and we will definitely be watching this. As far as a live stream, which you guys may be wondering, I may be going live later this afternoon depending on how storms want to act. I do have to go to the gym at like 6, so that will take up a chunk of my time, but when I get home I may go live depending on storms. Taking a look at our significant tornado parameter, I do look at this whenever we do have the potential for significant tornadoes, and we definitely do have some pretty decent significant tornado parameter values across this region, which are in line with the potential for maybe an isolated strong tornado amongst the potential for a couple of tornadoes across this region. So again, we could definitely see the potential for a couple of strong tornadoes depending on how storms want to act, but strong tornadoes are definitely not out of the question for today. Even if it is going to be a little bit more on the lower end, we could still see the potential for a strong tornado or two. Taking a look at our wind gust models and the potential for destructive wind gusts across this region, wind gust models are indicating that we could see the potential of some pretty strong damaging wind gusts. Some of the isolated storms may not really exhibit all that much of the potential for some significant wind gusts. However, in the very late afternoon and the very early morning of tomorrow, we are expected to see an MCS develop along that dry line. That's going to support the potential for an all hazards threat in a tornado outbreak further off to the east tomorrow. However, as that MCS tracks through this region, it will exhibit the potential of some destructive wind gusts, potentially upwards of 60 to potentially 80 miles per hour. I am out of time, so I can't cover our hail things on our mesoanalysis page. However, now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator and join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. If you live in any of the areas I covered for today, please stay with the alert for the time being. If you notice anything might have been wrong in this forecast or would like to make a suggestion or ask a question, please leave a comment. 3 other channels I highly suggest you check out are JaxonWX, Weather Watcher, and One Nation Weather. The links to their channels will be in the description. And hopefully, I may see you on the live stream if I go live later today. If not, I will see you guys tomorrow with another forecast.